Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Journey Within. I am your host, Andrea Escobar Logreda, spiritual medium and psychic. Each week, we get to connect with different healers, storytellers, and vision holders as they walk us through their journey within, dark night of the soul experience, what inspired them to take a more spiritual journey and create light out of darkness. I I want to thank a lot right now for this man that I'm about to introduce. I am so honored and grateful to have Michael Taylor, President and CEO of Creation Publishing Group, a company that specializes in creating programs and products that empower men and women to live an extraordinary life. Michael is also the CEO and president of To a Cool Club, a company that develops transformational education programs for youth, which I think we all know is needed. Michael has won numerous awards for his dynamic speaking styles. He has written over 8 books and is an Amazon.com bestseller. Michael has been married to the woman of his dreams for 18 years and is a proud father of 3 grown children. I feel like that's just the little blurb that everybody wants to hear, but you're going to be blown away by this man's optimism, his resilience, and his energy. So welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being you.
I am super excited to be here. I love your energy. I love your passion. I love everything that you're about. And you know what they say, like attracts like. So I'm glad we've been attracted to each other to have this conversation.
Yes, me too. I can't wait. So I'm gonna take us back to your upbringing. In your book and in other podcasts that I've heard, you talk about being the poster child of poverty growing up. And that I want to, before I give the mic off to you, there's a lot of people in this world that can identify with that. But to see how you literally were able to transform, and it wasn't just once, it was constantly throughout your life, it sends such a message to little kids that are growing up and they feel like they have no way out. Please share this story, because this right here proves that you are not what society tells you you are going to be. And Michael's going to dive deeper into this and share all of that with us. So I can't wait to hear.
Well, as mentioned, I was born in the inner city projects of Corpus Christi, Texas, to a single mom with 6 kids. And as mentioned, we were the poster children for poverty back then. Extremely, extremely poor. And interestingly enough, you hear people say that they didn't realize they were poor when they were kids. Well, I realized I was poor and I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. So fortunately for me, I was blessed at an early age with an awareness. And it was that awareness that I was able to be responsible for the outcomes in my life. And where I got that from was my mom. Because despite being poor, my mom never played victim. She never pointed fingers and placed blame on society or being black or whatever. She just said, look, and this is the one lesson that my mom taught me at a very early age. And she said, Michael, if you want something badly enough, there's no one that can stop you from attaining it except yourself. And it is that simple idea that has been the guiding post of my life, knowing or feeling or intuitively knowing that I was capable of creating anything my heart desired. Now, remember, back in the 60s, you obviously had the civil rights movement and all of that, and there's, a lot of racial segregation, and I remember all of that. I remember having actually race riots in elementary school between black kids and white kids and being separated in the cafeterias. And I remember all that very vividly. But again, I'm a firm believer in everything happens for a reason. And as I reflect back over my life, and it was those feelings of shame around being poor that actually that ignited something in me. Because I knew I wasn't born to be poor. I knew that there was so much more. And so because of the encouragement from my mom, one of the things that I did at a very early age was I love to read. And my mom would always tell me, you got to read the stories of the people who have what you want. And so at a very early age, I started reading books on wealth. And when I was 14, I read the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And it rocked my world. I was like, wow, that makes so much sense. And I actually started my very first company when I was 14 years old. And so it's been this journey of entrepreneurship that I know has been divinely orchestrated. So as I look again at the being born in poverty and all of that, and then dropping out of high school in the 11th grade because I went to this seminar and this guy convinced me that I could get rich selling vacuum cleaners. And so I dropped out of high school so I could try to get rich selling vacuum. Never sold a single vacuum cleaner. But there was a powerful lesson in that, though. Although it was a poor choice at the time, what it taught me, or what I became aware of, was my willingness to take risk. And it's important for us to have that as a skill, to be willing to take risk. So I was willing to take that risk, drop out of high school. And again, even though it was a poor choice, that lesson was powerful. Fortunately for me, I secured a job with a building supply center. I worked extremely hard. I climbed the corporate ladder. And at the age of 23, I was living the American dream. I had the house, the wife, the 2.5 kids and all of that. And by society standards, I was successful. And then at the age of 29, which is about 6 years, my dream turned into a nightmare as I went through a divorce, bankruptcy, a foreclosure, a deep, deep state of depression. And I was actually homeless for 2 years living out of my car. And during the darkest period of my life, I received a miracle. I was sitting up late one night because I was too depressed to sleep. And I was sitting at the edge of my bed, looking across the room at my bookshelf, when I happened to notice that every book on my bookshelf had something to do with getting rich or making money. Now, remember what I said earlier about when I was a young kid, how I wanted to be wealthy. Well, I was, again, reading all these books. So as I was looking at these books, this question just popped in my head. Michael, what if you took all the energy and effort you've used in trying to get rich and simply figure out how to be happy? And it was that one single simple question that literally changed and saved my life. Because as a result of asking that question, I stopped reading books on getting rich and making money. I started reading books on philosophy and psychology and spirituality and metaphysics and personal development. So I went on this amazing journey of transformation. And it's a journey that I'm still on today. But as a result of asking that question, I was able to shift my way of thinking, to stop looking outside of myself and to start looking in my own mind and heart to figure out what it was that was keeping me from being happy. And that journey has led me to now be living my version of what I call an extraordinary life as an author, motivational speaker, radio and TV show host. And so my intention is to share the lessons I've learned over the last 25 years of this journey with others to support and empower them to create extraordinary lives.
Wow. Whew. That there is like 20 lifetimes all in one. And you were only 29. So I want to talk about a little bit about this American dream with everything that's going on right now. I was actually having this conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and I'm like, the American dream was only for a very small amount of people, and it was white men. And sadly, it wasn't marketed to white men. It was marketed to everyone else. And then a lot of the people, once they achieved, quote unquote, the American dream, it was like you were still grasping for something else. You, though, the universe was like, you know what? No, instead of making you work for it, I'm just going to like flip it and give you the American nightmare so you can really figure out what it is that you want and what you don't want. How did you deal with ego and the shadow coming off? Because you're a black man, and the stigma there for getting help is way more than for a woman getting help. How did you go from how did you switch? How did you not let your ego dictate more of the narrative? And how did you get to a place where you started listening to that voice that was like, Michael, what if you put the same amount of energy into getting happy as you were to getting rich? How did you handle that? Because I feel like that's something that we all struggle with in our own individual way. And it's being able to kind of get through that hump.
Well, first of all, we have to understand that the American dream is a trap.
Oh, yeah.
We get trapped in this societal, cultural conditioning that says we're supposed to have these particular things and we'll be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's driven by consumerism and materialism. And so we think that if we just get the stuff, we'll be happy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I bought in it hook, line, and sinker, man. I was like, okay, I got the house. Yay. I got the wife. Yay. And so it looked on the outside like I had it all together. And so to answer the question, how was I able to get out of that trap, if you will? It's important to understand who and what we are as human beings. And I love what Wayne Dyer says. And he says, we are not humans having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. Now, when I first began this journey, I was actually an atheist. Did not believe in God at all. I had always been very rational, scientific, in my head kind of guy. And so when I first started this journey, I realized that I was depressed. And so I started researching depression, what it meant, how, the whole thing. And as I started researching depression, things started to make sense because I was reading all these books. I was, this was before YouTube and the internet and all of that, but I was learning. And I realized there was something about me that reading books wasn't going to fix. And I gained the courage to go to therapy. And that was that moment that shifted everything for me. Because for the first time, I got to a place of surrender, meaning I couldn't figure it all out. I needed help. And I think that those are the three most difficult words for any human being to say. I need help. But by gaining the courage to go to therapy and saying, I need help, everything began to shift. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, the stigma around asking for support is huge, but especially for Black men. Mm-hmm. There's this cultural conditioning that, and if you think about it, in this country, in the US, there was a time when being tough was a matter of survival. So you did not show and express other emotions because we were just trying to do everything we could just to survive. But my willingness to say I need help launched me onto this new trajectory of changing. Because as mentioned, I was successful externally. Mm-hmm. The good news is I was pretty smart. I could figure stuff out. But you can't figure out depression. You have to heal depression. You have to heal the cause of the depression. And so, in essence, I got to a point where I had two choices. It was either get help or die. Okay. So, there's only two things that will cause a person to want to change. One is pain, and the other is what I call divine discontent, which is that inner feeling that something's just off, right? Well, I had both, but most of mine was pain. I was in a lot of pain. And by going to therapy, it helped me recognize the source of that pain. And I possibly had the worst childhood a child could have from the age of 6 to 13, because I said I was born in inner city projects with my mom and 6 kids. Well, when I was 6 years old, my oldest sister got extremely ill. And so my mom took me, one of my brothers, and one of my sisters to live with our dad, who I didn't even know because he had left when I was like 2. And so when my mom took me to live with my dad, that's what the experts would call created abandonment issues. So there was this part of me that created this belief that people who love you will leave you. And that incident, that's what triggered a lot of my dysfunction. But by being willing to go to therapy, start dealing with my depression, start recognizing those childhood traumas and how they were still impacting my life as an adult, I was able to begin that healing process. And so that's kind of how I got out of it. I started listening to and learned to trust that still small voice within me. Mm-hmm. And during those 6 years or 7 years between 6 and 13, what I have come to recognize, if you put it in a spiritual context, once again, I believe everything happens for a reason. I personally believe that I literally attracted all experiences into my life. I believe that wholeheartedly. My soul knew exactly what I needed to go through to put me where I am today. And so those, what I call my 7 years of hell, laid the foundation for the person that I am today. Because I can see the gift in every pain, every trauma. I see the gift, I see the lesson, I see the goal in all of it. And so for those who may be watching this and may be struggling with challenges, first and foremost, don't deny the pain, because sometimes we'll spiritual bypass and not deal with the emotional stuff that's really going on. So recognize that emotional pain is real. You have to be willing to heal that. But in doing so, you start opening the door to start receiving direct impulses from the divine. Mm-hmm. So when we go through these traumatic experiences, we start this healing process. I believe what occurs is we stop listening to ego and we start listening to what I like to put it, instead of saying ego, I call it the little s self. So there's the little s self and there's the big S self. So the little s self is what some people may refer to as the ego. The big S self is what I call the divine intelligence or your connection to source. So what happens is when we surrender and start doing our work, we basically stop listening to the little s self. We start listening to the big S self. We start listening to the divine self. And that will start guiding us to next steps as we go on this journey.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, you're right. It is kind of, the more you start listening to this, the less that you can listen to that smaller voice, because you start realizing that those are all beliefs that don't align with this right here.
So let me interject this real quickly, because this, yeah. I'm very visual. Mm-hmm. And I know this will give a little clarity when we start talking about the big S self and the little S self. So imagine when we're first born, mm-hmm. and we pop into this room, okay? It's an all white room and there's a little cot, a little bed looking thing in the room. So there's two aspects of us. There's the little S self, there's the big S self. Now, when we're first born, the little S self is laying on the cot. The big S self is conscious, it's awake, and it's taking in all this information. So we're basically driven by the big S self. As we start experiencing pain as human beings, what happens is the little S's job is to protect you. That's the ego's job. So what happens is the ego, our little S self, gets off the cot The big S self gets on the cot, but now the little S self is running the show. So we're thinking about everything and we're protecting ourselves from all that external stuff. The big S self is still there, but it's kind of asleep. The little S self is running the show. Now, what happens is when we go on this inner journey, what we basically do is we wake up the big S self, it gets off the cot, the little S self gets back on the cot. But those are two aspects of you that won't change. They'll always be there for you. It's whether or not which one you're paying attention to. If we learn to pay attention to the big S self, that's when we're guided to go on this amazing journey and to connect to spirit. So a lot of people see the ego as a bad thing. The ego is not a bad thing. It's an aspect of you. It's the little S self. It's important. It's there for a reason. But you have to not allow it to control you. And unfortunately, that's what too many people do. Because when we experience that pain, we create all these defense mechanisms, right? These defense mechanisms are the ego's way of protecting us. And so when we learn to quiet the mind and listen to, and stop listening to the little S self and pay attention to the big S self, then we become transformed.
I love that way that you just explained it. And I kind of want to be like, Michael, don't you want to go to schools and talk to kids and tell them this? No, it really, I still struggle with not making my ego evil and realizing that she's just trying to keep me safe and protecting me from whatever I experienced when I was younger. But I love the way that you're kind of making this analogy of we inverted, because when we're born, we're just sponges taking everything in, but somehow we still are alive and functioning. And then there's a point where it does change, and it's kind of, oh my God, that's our goal, this reincarnation process, being able to make that switch again.
Mm-hmm. But we're fully conscious when we first show up. We're fully conscious. We're fully connected to all that is. But again, as part of this amazing journey of being human, divine intelligence created a system, if you will, to help us deal with the pain and the trauma that was going to happen. And it's its way of protecting us as we're going through life. Because when we really do the work, when we really heal and grow through this, then we recognize, once again, that that's just an aspect of ourselves that's there. But then we get to the big S self and we start fully expressing through the big S self. Because when we do that, then we move into what Michael Beckwith calls the I am consciousness. The I am consciousness is when we are connected to source and we don't allow the little S self to talk us out of doing the things we know we're capable of doing.
Okay, now this is a question I have. Do you still have the little S self pop in from time to time?
Absolutely. Every day. Every day.
No, and I say this because it's like we think we're going to get to some point where it just shuts up. And that's why I brought this up. That voice is never going to shut up. It's always going to continue to try to protect us.
And the beautiful part about it is as you do the work, you learn to recognize when it pops up. And you got, no, stop it. Shh. Shh. Go back to sleep. Okay. I got this, right? So it's a process. And like I said, there's some schools of thought, I guess, that believe that you shut it off forever when you become enlightened. I do not believe that. I again, because I believe it is simply a different aspect of who you are. And the difference is you simply are able to be aware and connect to and recognize when it's talking, and you can go, oops, shut it off.
Well, and then this, I'm going to actually, I kind of want to toss the outline that I have because I'm like, you have such great talking points on your own. Can I just let you talk about everything? But this is kind of interesting because it goes into like shadow. You know, there's so many denied aspects that we toss into the shadow, and there's this kind of, the shadow is bad, the shadow is not good, but it's the meaning that whatever word was given, and now you were either shamed, or you saw someone be shamed, or you were guilted, or whatever, pain occurred, and you toss it into your shadow. But if you really think about it, like, this was something I was just playing with, naive. When I was younger, my family's Hispanic. I grew up in South Florida, moved to Brazil for a year, and then moved back to South Florida. But it was sixth grade that I started. And there's certain sayings that unless you grow up in the city or in the US, even if you speak English, you're like, I never heard that. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. So there was a lot of new slang that were being used, and I was called naive and stupid and dumb. So I projected that off of, oh my God, it's bad to be naive because it makes me stupid and dumb. But recently I started playing with, well, kids, their innocence, that naive innocence, it's why they can still connect with different planes and different things, because they haven't allowed reality to sink in and make that switch between the big S and the little s. And kind of playing with that, it's the meaning that we give it. You can give naive a negative or positive meaning, but it's being able to play with that aspect and not holding an attachment to either side. Would you agree or disagree?
No, I agree, but just look at it this way. So the fact that you're having this inner dialogue about being naive,
yeah,
that is really just a little less self way to protect you.
Yeah.
See, that's just a little less self. So you said, oh, was I naive, and should I not have done this? Which, again, it's not bad. No. It's just that you're having this inner dialogue with little less self about how being naive makes you a certain way. So as you process that and you realize that you're having ideas, thoughts, beliefs, or whatever come up, the little less self is just questioning all those things. That's where all those questions are coming from. The big S self says, I am who I am. I am who I am. So those labels and titles and beliefs that I had about, am I naive or not, or whatever, see, that's separating from I am who I am. So when you get to I am who I am, that other conversation just sort of goes away. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, okay, now I just like I just like listening to the way your brain thinks. What do you think of the I am nothing and everything all at once? Because we are nothing and everything all at once.
Well, again, in essence, in true essence, we are it. We are all of it. I firmly believe that. But it's important while we're on this plane to understand, and that's why we have an ego, so that in this reality, we can sort of make sense out of stuff, because moving to that place of I am that I'm everything is more of a feeling and an attainment that we're trying to get to, an awareness of. But see, that's why you shouldn't see ego as a bad thing, because it's giving us a frame of reference in this reality. We need to have those frames of reality. We need to have these frames of reference so that we can kind of make sense of this experience called being human.
It's what takes us from being spiritual beings to now being spiritual beings having a human experience. Your book is giving me way more now that I'm talking to you. Yes, listen to this interview before you read the book. It's just gonna enlighten everything so much more. You dropped out of high school, and I'm sure you have 3 grown children. So everything happens for a reason. And as you said, I truly believe we call in everything, good and bad. People think you only manifest what you want. And I'm like, no, even the shitty situations that you didn't want in also were manifested into your life from some need. it needed to happen. You know, you went into the sales and it took you there. And if you wouldn't have gone there, you wouldn't have gotten captivated by the American dream and then gone through that. So, you know, it did need to happen. But what do you say to kids that are in that, like, I just want to, because it comes from a need of, I'm tired of my current circumstances. I want to take control. And money is that way that I feel like when we're still in this, it's trying to survive and this still in this survival mindset that you're like, money's going to give me the out of this hell, this poverty, this insert whatever pain you're going through. I think we often think money's our out. It's been conditioned by society. What would you tell other kids in that space, knowing everything that you know now and speaking to them in that space? Because as a 30-year-old, I can relate to what you're saying. But if I was listening to when I was 16, I would be like, oh, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Can you stop? So, and you have kids. So that's why I'm like, how have you?
Yeah. So first of all, my oldest son is 40.
Wait.
My younger son is 37 and my daughter's 34.
So you can be my dad. All right.
So, but here's the thing. We have to have money and material possessions on this plane, if you will. The problem is too many times people that are trying to accumulate money because they think it's going to fill a hole or void or something in them. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to make a lot of money. But if we learn to focus our attention instead of on making money, but on being abundant. If we learn to be abundant, it really doesn't matter how much money you have coming in, because an abundance mindset lets me know that, first of all, I have the ability to create as much abundance as I need. Okay? So if you're entirely focused on money the way I used to be, see, I was driven by the amount of money I had in my bank account, my house, all that material stuff. But see, a lot of that was driven by a deep sense of shame. It was like, because of some of the experiences that I mentioned as a kid, I had this insatiable need for other people's approval. And so by being successful, it helped me feel good about myself. Okay? But here's the thing. I had all the stuff, and yet I still felt empty. I didn't feel connected to myself. And so rather than chase money, or shall I say, rather than chase fame, we should commit to expressing fulfillment. There's a distinction, fame versus fulfillment. Too many times we do it because we want money and stuff, because we think it'll make us happy. But if we shift and focus on fulfillment, that's an inner experience. And so I feel so connected to everything, so connected to source, that it creates an abundant mindset. And as the saying goes, like attracts like. If I have this abundant mindset, I'm going to attract more abundance in all sorts of forms, right? Writing books, getting paid for it. Being a speaker, getting paid for it. Coaching, getting paid for it. So I don't limit myself as to how the abundance is going to come in, but it begins with a mindset that I am abundant and that I have the capacity to attract to me any amount of abundance that I want. But I don't attach myself to just money. And that's what too many times most people do.
No, that's It's a very different form of looking at things. It's trying to find fulfillment versus external things to validate how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you how did you switch to an abundant mindset? Because it's a lot of you talk about this in your book, subconscious versus the conscious. Like we're in our conscious 10% of 8 to 10%. Okay, if we want to go to 12%, the rest of the time we're in our subconscious. So if your subconscious beliefs from when you were growing up were all around poverty and scarcity, while your mom did kind of put in that little seed of, hey, you can actually create the life that you want as long as you focus on what you want, there was still a lot of there's still a lot of scarcity mindset. And how did you switch to an abundant? Because
But,
that's
but,
something
but
I'm
here's the thing. I never had a scarcity mindset per se, because
oh
my mindset was always on getting rich. Now, here's what was driving it though. What was driving it was this deep sense of shame that I'm not enough. And so I drove hard to get rich so that I would feel like I was enough. Okay. So I've never had a scarcity mindset,
okay.
but what was driving my mindset was, and we talk about the subconscious mind,
Yeah.
subconsciously, what I had was a belief that I wasn't lovable.
Okay.
Okay. So it was that lack of feeling lovable that drove my success. Because, like I said, I can go, wow, mom, look what I did. I just bought my first house. My mom's like, oh, baby, that's so sweet. So there was this need for approval that was driving me. And that's how I was able to create, if you will, abundance.
Mm,
But it was at the expense of my soul.
okay.
See, I was doing it all to meet other people's approval and to try to look good externally.
Yeah.
But when I started doing my healing work,
Mm,
getting to why I felt that way, for example, that fear of abandonment, that fear of abandonment was driving a lot of my actions, because it was like I thought I needed to do these things in order for people to love me.
yeah.
If I didn't have money, people wouldn't love me. So I had to work hard to get money so people would love me.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're willing to go deep
Mm-hmm.
and start uncovering some of those hidden beliefs, and since we're talking about those, let's
Yeah.
jump into the subconscious mind just a little bit for those
Yeah.
who are watching. So I love the metaphor of the conscious and subconscious mind like the iceberg. If you look at an iceberg, 90% of the ice is below the surface of the water. Only 10% is above the water.
Yeah.
Well, that's like how the conscious mind works. The 10% is above water, 90% subconscious is below. Overwhelmingly, the subconscious mind is what's driving our behavior. The subconscious mind is 1,000 times more powerful than the conscious mind. And here's another way to look at it. So imagine someone who's an astrophysicist. Okay, that person is obviously an extremely smart person. That means their conscious mind is strong, if you will. Okay, so imagine that I gave that person a book to read on relationships. So that person could read and study that book and could quote relationship stuff from that book. Boom. And then that person gets into a relationship and the relationship doesn't work. But wait a minute, they've got the conscious mind. They know how to do relationships on a conscious level. What's causing the relationship to fail? Well, it's the 90% below. It's the subconscious programming that we have that's running the show.
Yeah.
And so if we aren't willing to address that 90% subconscious, which the subconscious mind is really just a storehouse of beliefs that you have about yourself and the world around you. That's really all it is. If you want to change your subconscious programming, you have to be willing to become aware and acknowledge what that programming is. So for me, for example, I had a strong conscious mind. I ran companies and did all of that, but I had the subconscious belief that I wasn't lovable. Well, I had to be willing to clean that up. I had to be willing to investigate that. And that's part of that healing process. And one thing that I also know, that as a human being, this is what happens in our culture. You hear a lot of talk today about mental health, right? Everybody's talking about mental health. I will assert to you that it's not so much mental health as emotional health. It is the energy that is trapped in us that we haven't dealt with, that is the result of the subconscious programming that we have that drives our behavior. So when we talk about healing, healing is the release of negative energy. That's a simple way to look at it. Healing is the release of negative energy, because when we're kids, when we feel something, we express it. That's just the way it is. And so you see a kid, he's out there, you see two kids out there playing, and all of a sudden they're fighting and they're mad at each other and they're screaming at each other and they're angry, but then they let it go. And the next minute they're hugging each other, and it's okay because they release that negative energy. But as we grow older, what we do is we start suppressing, repressing, and denying those energies, those feelings. And that energy stays trapped in us. And if it's negative, it will build up until it is released somehow. So when you see people that snap, what is that snapping? It's that energy that is built up for so long and it's so powerful that it has to be released somehow. And what happens is when people don't have the emotional tools to deal with that energy appropriately, then it comes out what we call sideways sometimes. It comes out in anger and rage and violence and all of that, because they didn't have the tools to deal with that negative energy. And so what we have to be willing to do is understand the process of healing that energy by releasing it. And as we release that energy, we're basically releasing, or what allows us to release that energy is for us to recognize what's driving it. What is the belief about myself? I'm not lovable, I'm terrible, I'm bad, whatever. And that creates this thought pattern that people get stuck in, but it's that feeling of unworthiness that really drives it. And so when we can teach people how to feel and process and release that negative energy, then they become free.
Wow. I'm just thinking about how different it would be if we were taught that versus we're broken mental health.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I started this company for kids, because if we catch them early, give them the tools to deal with their emotions appropriately, then we don't have all these random shootings and all this violence and so forth. So you start early and give the kids the tools to deal with that. Then we start eradicating those things from society.
This is kind of bringing me back to something that you talk about in your book. You talk about hiding behind your optimism until a really good friend brought it up to your attention that you were disconnected from your emotions. In a world where it's not, and I sometimes I even think that even in the spiritual community, it's almost a little bit of spiritual bypass when it's like, oh, don't think negative because then that's going to come into fruition. And it's like, if our thoughts were really that powerful, we would be literally creating the world's biggest shit show every 10 seconds, like realistically speaking. But there's this don't dig up your past, leave it where it is. But you talk a lot about how, if at least in your opinion and your experience, and I very much identify with that, you can't, there's you share such a there's someone else's teaching that you were sharing about, but you have to like stick your hand into
A
the
Jan
wound.
LeBon.
Yes, you have to stick your hand into the wound and deal with it instead of trying to just almost put band-aids on it and thinking it's going to heal. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I feel like we are taught not to deal with our negative emotions. It's almost like put a smile on and then you'll feel better.
Yeah. And so, as mentioned, I had gone through a lot of stuff and I was homeless for a while, and I had this friend of mine who allowed me to come stay with her for a while. And she's just an incredible soul, just an amazing, amazing friend. And so I was living with her. I didn't have a car, so I would borrow her car to go look for jobs and so forth and so on. And one day she came home from work and she asked me how my day went. And I'd always hidden behind this positive, optimistic, everything's great attitude. And so she came in and asked me that question. I said, oh man, I didn't get a job today, but I know the universe is going to support me and I'm excited because I know it's coming, blah, 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 blah. And she said, Michael, she says, no, I want you to just tell me, how are you feeling right now? And I just told you, I'm excited because, I know I'm going to get a job. I know the universe is going to support me, blah, blah, blah. She says, Michael, cut the crap. Just tell me, how are you feeling right now? And I said, what do you mean? I'm telling you. And she says, Michael, stop. And she said, Michael, so she says, answer this. She says, how does it make you feel to not be able to go see your kids because you don't have any money? She said, how does it make you feel to have to depend on me? She says, what does that feel like? And so I was trying to process it all in my head like I always did, but she kept prodding me. And finally, it's like I shut my brain off and I got into my heart. And I started to connect with what she was saying. And the first thing I said was, I feel like a failure. Now, for me, that admission was like stabbing myself in the heart to say that I felt like a failure, right? And she says, Michael, keep going. Tell me more. And I said, I'm scared because if I don't find a job, you might kick me out. And she said, just keep going. So I started really connecting with my feeling versus what I was thinking. And so this went on for a couple of minutes. And all of a sudden I remember saying, I'm really sad. And when I said it, I felt it. I allowed myself to feel that sadness. And all of a sudden the tears started coming up. And she kept prodding me. She says, Michael, so just stay with that. And all of a sudden it just started flooding out of me. I said, I've been hiding behind this positive shit for so long that I haven't allowed myself to feel what's really there. And she lovingly embraced me and said, Michael, you don't have to be positive all the time. She says, just be authentic with what you feel. She says, I love how you're so optimistic and how you're able to see the good in everything. She says, but you're in denial. And I said, yeah, I got it. And in that moment, I realized that, I had recently become involved with the New Age movement, right? The New Age movement, everything's perfect, God is love, blah, 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 blah. And that can be a form of denial. For me, that's exactly what it was, because I was unwilling to release that negative energy that was in me, that hurt, that pain, that sadness. And so what spiritual bypassing does is it keeps us in our conscious mind. It keeps us up here in our intellect, in our heads. And it isn't until we get into our hearts and heal those wounds and those scars that are controlling our lives that we can become free. And as you mentioned, there's this idea that I've heard a lot of people say, I don't want to dig up the past.
Mm-hmm.
Why should I dig up the past?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can assure you, if you don't heal those parts of yourself, something will always be missing. You cannot fully connect with your full divinity if you're unwilling to release any negative pent up energy you may be still holding on to. And so the most powerful thing that I've done in that vein was I did the work of a man named John Bradshaw. And John Bradshaw was a therapist. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, but he had a workshop called Healing the Inner Child. And as I mentioned earlier, my childhood was as traumatic as it could get. And through his work, I was able to heal those parts of myself that had been traumatized as a kid. I mean, because for me, there was sexual abuse, there was rape by a female cousin, there was physical violence that you can't even imagine. No child should have gone through that stuff. So I had a lot of pain that I was covering up. And through his work, I was able to heal and move through a lot of it. And in doing so, that's how I became free. And the beautiful part about that is when we do our emotional work, it connects us more spiritually. Mm-hmm. Because if we've got all that negative energy inside of us, we cannot connect to the divine. It's like blocking the channel. It's like keeping you from connecting to source. And healing and releasing that negative energy is how we open the flow to source.
Beautifully said. Thank you for that and for sharing that with us. So you discovered this, and I'm getting like into your book, but I just kind of want to give people a little bit of like, look, he's literally talking about how shitty and everything, but you made it work. And more than anything, it's something that self-awareness. This is something that you talk about a lot, having to take that step to actually take responsibility for everything in your life, the good, the bad, the ugly, and being self-aware. What do you tell people when they're like, well, you don't know, it was easier for you, like you got it because we love to do that. We love to kind of be like, no, you're special. No, you did this, but I can't. What do you say to that? Because I doubt, looking at you now, it's very easy to be like, well, no, but it's like part of you also wants to say, go back in time and talk to 8-year-old me. Or go back in time to talk to 10 or 12-year-old me. You're not going to see the person standing right here. What do you say to that? Because I feel like there's also this kind of culture of my pain is different than your pain. And I'm going to throw a little shade to the mental health profession. They like to tell you are unique and this is your experience and no one else is going through this. And it also it kind of makes you feel like you're isolated and there's no way out because I'm the one experiencing this. What do you have to say to people that are in that?
So first of all, recognize that if your mind goes to, he doesn't understand my pain, mm-hmm. That's just a little less self. That's the little less self's ways of protecting you. Because we will do everything in our power not to feel whatever that pain is. And the little s self's job is to try to keep you from feeling that pain. Mm-hmm. So if you're listening to this right now and you're in challenge, adversity, whatever, understand that there is no pain that you may be experiencing or have experienced that I haven't felt. I've been in the darkest places you could ever imagine. As mentioned, being born in poverty, being homeless for 2.5 years, living in a car, contemplating suicide. I know the feeling of hopelessness that we can have, that feeling of being a failure and failing my kids and failing my mom, and just, I've been there. I know what that feels like. The challenge that we have is that the little less self, once again, is trying to keep us from feeling pain. And so what we'll try to do is we'll try to rationalize in our minds how not to feel that pain. And by saying that you can't understand what I've been through, that's a way of avoiding it. But I love the saying, the only way out is through. We have to be willing, first of all, to know that there's a part of us that can get through any pain. That's the big S selfish job. There's a part of you that can move through any pain. I don't care what it is. Trust me, you have it in you to move through anything. I'm living proof of it. So rather than say, you don't understand my pain, shift your awareness to say, whatever it is I'm dealing with, I'm willing to deal with it. See, because one of the fears that we'll have, well, let me just say this. One of the fears I had when I first went to therapy, the greatest fear that I had was, well, let me set this up. Let me set this up this way.
Yeah.
When I went to therapy the first time, I'm sitting in the therapist's office, and the therapist asked me to share some of the things that I went through as a kid. So I started sharing some of the things, and I remember seeing her face, and I could just sense that she was feeling what I was talking about. But the whole time I was sharing with her, I had this big smile on my face. And so after sharing some stuff with her, she says, Michael, why are you smiling? And my response was, I made it. She says, what do you mean? What do you mean? I said, I made it through. I said, I'm okay. She says, Michael, you're not okay. You're not okay. And then this is where the magic happened. She said, Michael, how would you feel if those same things happened to your son? And when she said that, I got out of my head, I got into my heart, and I could feel years and years of repressed pain. Because I couldn't imagine my son going through what I went through. And for the first time, when that happened, that was when I was beginning my process, I started allowing myself to feel years and years of repressed pain, and it was painful. And so the fear was that if I allowed myself to feel that, I wouldn't be able to stop it. I didn't want that pain to continue. And so I immediately shut off the feeling and started thinking. And what did I say? I looked at the therapist. I said, how did you do that? What did you just do to me? Why did you do that? She says, Mike, I didn't do anything. She says, you've got years and years of repressed pain, and the only way out for you is through. And so after that experience, I realized that I was so disconnected from my emotions that I needed to heal. And so through the work with the therapist, I started healing some of that pain. After several sessions, I only went to 5 sessions, after a couple of sessions, we had done some work. And she said, Michael, look, you've done some amazing work. Because again, I had processed a lot of that pain. She says, now the next thing I'd like to suggest is that you go to group. She says, because individually, there's nothing I can really do for you because you've broken through, is the term she used. She says, but you just need to continue your healing. And my recommendation is that you do this in a group. Well, I wasn't ready for a group. I was like, nah. And I walked away from therapy. I said, no. The truth was I was still in denial. I didn't want to feel that pain. And I definitely didn't want to share that with a group of people. It was difficult enough with one person, but in a group, wasn't feeling that at all. Because I'd always had an aversion to groups and intimacy. That was just something I wasn't comfortable with. And so I left therapy. Now, the good news was I continued my journey, and I did all these different workshops, and then I was introduced to John Bradshaw stuff, and I eventually healed that stuff that I was afraid to heal at the time. But my point is, if you're watching this video and you're having that conversation that I don't understand your pain, I do. I fully understand your pain. I also know that you have everything within you to move through any pain. It's there for you. There's that part of you that was there for me as I went through it. It's in you also. You just have to connect to it and trust it that it'll pull you through.
I think that this is me speaking just because I'm visual. Maybe for your next book, maybe just like put yourself on the thing and let people listen to you. Can I just like listen? Like I'm literally thinking, I'm like, I I can relate to so much to what you're saying right now with therapy. I have been in therapy since I was little due to my parents' divorce, but I was really good at, from a very young age, being hypervigilant to those around me. So I learned to pick up on what body cues meant talk and what don't. So when I would go to therapy, I never talked. And for the longest time, people would talk about therapy. And I'm like, that doesn't work. Like I was 18. I'm like, that doesn't work. And it wasn't until I was 25. I had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I was seeing a new doctor. And I walked into her office, and she said, when you're ready to take the stick you have your ass out, you can walk back in. And I was just like, what? No one's ever talked to me like that. Who do you think you are? But she poked enough that I kind of had to, all right, I need to put down this armor. I need to just walk in and not be ready to fight her like I am with everyone else. And she made me question everything that I thought was real. And through that, I was able to actually learn to be honest and talk for the first time with people. And I tell people, I'm like, I didn't learn to healthily communicate. So I was like 25 and I wasn't ready to implement that to the world. So I was probably like 28. So it's not like this has been forever. I'm recently learning things, and it's a lot of being able to have that self-awareness of where you're at and really.
But here's the beautiful part about it. So who's ever watching this right now, believe it or not, wherever you are right now is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Now, it is my belief that divine intelligence, God, whatever you want to call it, is perfect. And you fit into that perfection. And if you're willing to begin trusting that divine intelligence that is within you. Every major religion points to a very simple idea. There is a part of you that is divine. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to assert that that divine part of you, that big S self of you, is the reason you're watching this right now. It's no accidents. So you just have to accept and buy into my idea that you can overcome anything. You really can. It's in you. There's a part of you, divine intelligence, God, whatever you want to call it, that's there loving you right now. It always has. It always will. You just have to gain the courage to learn to trust it. And don't do what I did. When I went to therapy the first time, the first thing I asked the therapist was, how long is this going to take? It shouldn't take more than 6 weeks, right? Come on now. 6 weeks is long enough. No, you can't put a time frame on healing. Commit to the process. Know that this divine intelligence will guide you along the way, and it'll take whatever time it takes. But rest assured, I'm living proof of what's on the other side, which is joy, passion, purpose, aliveness. It's all available to you. It's calling you right now. That's what's driving you. You want to get to that, because the amazing thing that happens when we do this work and really do this work, like yourself, you want to share it with others, because we're all one. We're all connected. And so when we do our work, we connect to that part of ourselves that is divine, but it is divine that is in me. It's the same divinity that's within you. It's that same part of you that's saying you can transform your life. So just learn to trust it. It's available. It's there for you. And it can only do one thing, and that's to love you. And it does that unconditionally.
Thank you for that. That was such a beautiful ending point. No, it's such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful ending point. And I think I'm just gonna put this little blurb in. It's we're all looking for love. If you didn't get the love that you wanted and needed when you were younger, the amazing news is that you can give that to yourself now. So just wanted to share that.
You're never too old to have a second childhood.
No, you're not. I love it. So with everything that you have going on, because you're like killing it as it is, but I feel like you're not done. You have like 20 million things just like ready to come into fruition. What are you currently working on that you'd love to share with us?
I'm writing a new book. Actually, interestingly enough, I've written a book a year for the past 6 years.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. Wait, no. Wait, do you like take a month off and hide yourself in a cabin and write? Or is this just like ongoing? You show up every day and you write?
No, truth be told,
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a regular day job that I go to.
Ah.
This is my passion project, speaking and writing, that I'm moving towards doing full time, but right now it's just a hobby.
Okay.
But my next project is called What If Jesus Were a Coach?
Ooh.
That's the title of the book.
Ooh.
And in the book, I'm dispelling a lot of the erroneous teachings
Mm-hmm.
around God and Jesus and Christianity. And it's going to be profound, but it's going to give everyone an opportunity to really understand what I believe the purpose of Jesus showing up really was. Because there's so much negativity and sin and all that wrapped up into religion, that I'm going to challenge everyone to say, oh, I never saw Jesus that way. Because in the book, I take, first of all, my 10 favorite lessons, that I learned.
Yeah.
But it's really about breaking down the origins of the universe and how I see God and how it all began. And it's going to be a transformational experience for anyone, and you don't have to be religious to get something out of it. I'm really excited about it. It's already kind of flowing through me, and I know that I'm just a vessel it's just being poured through, and it's going to be exciting to be out the end of the year.
Oh man, I can't wait for that. I'm like really excited about that, just because I vibe so much with your philosophical views. I'm intrigued to see where this takes even more. Oh, that's so fun. And then where can people find you now? Are you hanging out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse?
Yeah, I'm on all of them under Coach Micheal Taylor. So if you go to www.coachmichealtaylor.com, that's my primary website. And most of my social media properties, you can find me at Coach Micheal Taylor.
Perfect. I will drop that on the show notes so everyone can just click and go down a Coach Micheal Taylor rabbit hole like I did. You're going to be blown away, and then you're going to want to email him and be like, hey, can we be friends? Awesome. Micheal, thank you so much for spending some time of your day with us and sharing some of your wisdom with us. I can't wait to see what comes up in the next few years. I have a feeling we're going to be connecting again. And I'm going to be like, do you know how you said that when you wrote about meeting Wayne Dyer, that it was like the best thing? That's how I feel when I met you in person. And you're going to be like, what? Why? Because you're my Wayne Dyer. Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be like that. You'll see. In a few years, I'm going to be like, oh, Michael. Yeah.
Well, know first and foremost that I love you. I love who you are, what you're doing in the world. And it is my absolute honor and privilege to connect with you. And as mentioned, nothing happens by accident. So we've been brought together by a divine purpose, for a divine purpose. So it's been my honor to hang out with you today.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone, have a beautiful rest of your day. And I will see you again next week for another episode of The Journey Within. Bye, guys.